Welcome. Of course, we are here to launch Paul's new book, Grand Larcenies, Translations and Imitations of 10 Dutch Poets. He has edited and translated this book, as we know. We are joined as well by Robert Minhinnick, who you will know as a Carcanet poet and also a very, very well-known and celebrated translator himself. He's going to be in conversation with Paul later on in the event. So we want to get you involved in that conversation. Please find the chat box. Say hello to us in the chat box. Let us know where you're watching from. Please also find the Q&A button. You can get some questions in there for Robert to put to Paul later on in the event. That'll be towards the end of this hour. We also have 3 of the contributors with us tonight. So we're going to have 4 short poetry readings, both in Dutch and in English, which is really exciting. Now, just so that you know, while we're having the readings, I'm going to have the text on screen. Tonight, I'm going to have both Dutch and English versions on screen for you so you can follow along with the readings. Just be aware that you are in control of your own screen. If anything's too small or you need someone's face larger, just have a play around with that. And if you have any problems, just drop them in the chat and we'll try and help you there. So I think that's everything from me. Thanks for being here once again, and I'm just going to invite Robert on screen to start with, and he is going to give us a bit of a broader introduction to the book and to Paul's work and things like that. So,
well, congratulations, PC Evans, Paul Evans. I'm enjoying Grand Larcenies because of the tone created by its introduction. Beachcombers on the North Sea? Of course. Poets to me are always beachcombers, especially in the world of climate change and tidal rising. This surely means the poet's material becomes continuously richer and stranger, maybe tragic, of course. And increasingly surreal might be the best description of what we sift through in this world's flotsam and jetsam. I personally have compared poets to beachcombers, living where I do, 100 meters from the sea. So this should be no surprise. Paul has been good enough to mention the adulterous tongue, my translations and versions from the Welsh that Carcanet published about 2004. In my introduction to the adulterous tongue, the text concludes with a quotation from Gwyneth Lewis. Gwyneth states, looking back, I blame the translator. And for what? Nothing less than the death of a language. The poets tonight should tell us about this possibility. The translator might also attempt an answer. Because Dutch is not imperiled by translation, or is it? Is the translator a collaborator in the death of a language he or she professes to love? Just a sec. As the Welsh, spoken by only 500,000 people, while Dutch is the tongue of 15, 16, 17 million people, although it has grown in official and bureaucratic importance, and the Welsh government stated it working on creating 1 million Welsh speakers, there are still many who scoff at this. Because in the same nation, the same borders, everyone also speaks English. Is this inevitably the universal tongue? As to the Dutch poets here tonight, I ask, are you collaborators in the death of your own language? One poet, Tom Morris, refused to take part in my project known as the Adulterous Tongue. He wrote, translations of his own strict meter poetry really do lose so much in translation as to make the effort of reading it almost worthless, like passing around a bottle of non-alcoholic wine. Whenever Tom writes, I've seen pieces of mine in English, I've only dimly recognized them, like friends who've been involved in a terrible accident. I responded in my introduction to The Adulterous Tongue saying, undoubtedly there are terrible accidents in this volume. There might even be fatalities. But surely that is the excitement of translation. For me, it's like driving at night without headlights. Certainly, I would never claim to be a faithful translator. I'm not interested in the mimetic, and to this writer, faithfulness has a dogged, even doggish quality. My English versions of the poems in The Adulterous Tongue were not conceived as copies or echoes of the originals. If I were translating them next year, they might look very different. Yet I would be disappointed if they had not captured in some degree the spirit, the colors, and yes, the meaning of the originals. Now, I suppose that's a challenge to the poets. It's certainly a challenge to the editor and the person who's brought this book into being. But welcome, Paul. And although I can't see you, I hope it goes well.
Thanks, Robert. Okay, there's a very good reason why I asked Robert to introduce this event. The three Dutch poets that I'm going to read tonight are amongst the very best Dutch poets over the last 40 years. We're very privileged to have them here tonight. And Robert has a relationship with these poets because he started publishing them in Poetry Wales when he was the editor 20 years ago. And he and Rob Schouten, who are going to read tonight, edited a seminal anthology of Dutch poetry together in a different light. So Robert has this connection with Dutch poetry over the last couple of decades. And he's being too modest with The Adulterous Tongue, which is an absolutely excellent book, as many of you already know. I've read it many times. I was rereading it again yesterday. And I think what it is about that book and Robert's presence is not just that he tries to put the poets down with the best of his abilities to really convey them. He has actually made a number of the Welsh poets who wouldn't be known outside their language, outside our language, except through Robert's versions of them. And there were two poets in that who we knew as young poets. One has now died, Ewan Llwyd, in very similar circumstances to Menno Wichmann, as the Dutch poets will remember. And Ellen ap Howell, who was also a wonderful young poet. She still is, but she has early onset dementia. So Robert has actually crystallized their work forever in absolutely excellent versions and introduced them to a huge readership outside of the Welsh language area. So he's been much too modest in what he's done.
Thanks, Paul. So we are now going to go into the readings. I think first we're going to hear from Eva Gerlach. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to read 4 poems. Vocabulaire. Dit is je oog. Dit is de zon. Dit koude dat aan je trekt is tocht door het open raam. Dit is water waarin je altijd past. Dat is de ketel die op het vuur zingt boven de 4 draaiknoppen van het gas. Hier zie je het broodmes in zijn plank staan. Al deze dingen moet je goed onthouden. Vandaag of morgen krijgen ze hun zin. Drukte. Het is raar gesteld met de doden. Schuiven in je aan, zitten met hun holtes in je knieën, hun kootjes in je vingers, een brief te schrijven, even sloom als jezelf, even beperkt op de hoogte van weerbericht en genade, twijfel en kostprijs. En als het etenstijd, bedtijd, tijd is om de honden uit te laten, tijd om een kind te krijgen, een man te begraven, altijd lopen ze, meegaand, volgzaam, met hun kammen en doornen, hun schaambeen boven je geslacht, hun schedelpan rond je zinnen, hun graat om je merg, in je door, Tik, tik, tik. Alleen je vel dempt hun drukte een beetje. Well, this is the second in a series of poems about my then 95 years old mother, who was consulting a witch doctor about her many problems, including dementia, aphasia, loneliness, illness, and imminent death. This is their first meeting, face to face. The doctor, Mr. Toba, charges €1,000 per consultation. Mijn moeder loopt door de kamer. Mijn moeder loopt door de kamer op zoek naar een woord. Het woord heeft haar verlaten. Ze weet niet meer hoe het ging. De beweging ervan in haar mond. Als ze het zei, begon alles opnieuw. Wat heel was, kwam terug. En rampen maakte ze ongedaan, want de tijd kroop als een vogeltje in haar hand en liet zacht op zich blazen. Woord, woord, woord. Hoe kan je de wereld veranderen als je het woord niet meer weet? Meneer Toba haalt zijn schouders op. Hebt u de 1000? Ga toch zitten. Wat mompelt u toch? So this is the last one in the series. Straks. Het was avond toen ik je losliet. Het gat van je mond sloot. Er bewoog niets meer in je. Dat kon ik voelen, want ik hield je vast. Dat mocht voor een keer. Nu is het 05:40 december, stikdonker. De krantenjongen gaat op zijn rammelfiets rond en ik denk aan je als aan een woord dat ik bijna weet. Kan het niet zeggen, maar het is er bijna. Straks wordt het in me naar binnen geschoven. Dan sta ik op, ga je kamer in, maak je wakker en ga je bewegen. Dan tellen we samen de woorden, die zijn er dan weer.
Thanks so much, Eva. It was really great to hear from you. So the second reader this evening is going to be Kay Michelle. So just ask him on screen. Sorry, you're still muted.
Good evening. I'm going to read 3 poems, and I'm going to start out with a poem that was written for the 5th of May. That's the day on which the nation celebrates the end of the Second World War. And it's called No and Yes in Dutch. Nee en ja. Nee en ja, er is altijd meer dan één keus. En voor je iets doet of laat, kun je altijd tot basta tellen. Een ruzie vraagt 2 meningen. Een kus, 4 lippen, een lichaam, 5 liter bloed. Om regen te maken, een boom, een huis, muziek, een droom, zijn meerdere elementen vereist. En in de sporen van schichtige dieren rond een modderige drinkplaats schitteren 's nachts ontelbare sterren. Voor iemand die slechts denkt met 1 en niet de ander, is dat getal een hamer en is de hele wereld een spijker. The next one is called Domino. Er zwemt een barst door het huis. Niemand die luistert. Uit de schaduw groeien schaduwen in het onderwaterlicht dat passerende auto's werpen op de muren rondom het bed. In de diepblauwe stilte herhaalt een jongetje lipzacht al wat gezegd is die dag en stopt woord voor woord de gaten in het geluid dat huwelijk heet. De vloer golft, de deurklink is ver en het jongetje houdt zijn handpalm als een boek in zijn handen. En ik lees, kom terug, ga weg. Een spreuk, een dominosteen die een ster slaat in het glas van mijn huis. Dan begint het buiten bruidsjurken te sneeuwen. And the last one is called vuistregels. Is het woonhuis besmet, zeiden ze in het dorp van mijn grootouders. Sluit dan een varken een nacht lang op. Het kwaad kruipt in het beest en alles is de volgende morgen schoon. In het bouwsel dat elk leven is, breekt er een moment aan dat heet goede raad was duur. Een lekkage heeft de muren bedekt met Rorschach-figuren en het ruikt naar iets dat ooit tijdens een oud spelletje werd verstopt. Kijk de tafel rond en probeer uit te vinden wie de sigaar zal zijn. Zo luidt een gouden tip voor pokeraars. Zie het slachtoffer niet, dan rest er maar één mogelijkheid. Dus zeg ik deze nieuwe dag tegen het gezicht in de schierspiegel. Stop met graven als je in de put zit. Wees bereid auw en ja te zeggen. Kijk om je heen, doorzoek alle kamers en vind je het varken niet, dan ben jij het. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really, really good to hear the poems read in the original language, so thank you. I am going to now invite our third reader on screen. We're going to hear from Rob Shooten, who appears to have actually been disconnected, sadly, so sorry about that. I'm actually going to then hand over to PC Evans, Paul, the editor and translator, who's going to read some more poems and speak a little bit more about the book.
You want me to read a couple of things till Rob comes back?
Yeah, so we could go into your poems if you like.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just get them up on screen for you.
Some of you will have read this edition of PN Review, and I mentioned in that how when a language is translated into another language, that it occurs piecemeal, that you don't have a generation of poets that is translated. It depends on the championing of any particular translator. So you'll find that some Dutch poets have been translated. A number of the translators are in the audience tonight. So Carcanet, Ark, Blood Axe, and Shearsman, they produced some good work. But other major poets have never been translated into English, including the three guests we have tonight. And the person I'm about to read now, this is a guy called Gerrit Kavanaugh, and he's actually the dominant figure in Dutch poetry following the Second World War. And he is also one of the major European poets that has never been published in the UK in book form. So here's two of his poems. This is called Day of the Dead. It's spring again, Day of the Dead. But as these words were written, it was snowing. They wrote today as well, but now that they're spoken, it's still snowing on a deathly city. The day's listening as the words ward off the silence, as if time could ever be stayed. They name themselves by appropriated names. They wish to explain what still remains deathly quiet. They cry high and low in a hole, spell out that the snow will not thaw on the spring flowers or the monuments or the heaps of rubbish and the urns of ash. The white silence grows slowly grayer. and what the words wish to utter is that the dead are dead, the page is black. This is another poem of his called One Still. One still needs to count the summers, to tender a verdict, to render winter to blizzard. One still needs to pick up a few things before dark asks one the way, black candles for the basement. One still needs to give sons a good talking to measure daughters for armor to teach ice water to boil. One still needs to disclose the bloodstains to the photographer, to untether from home, to change the ribbon in the typewriter. One still needs to dig a grave for a butterfly, to switch father's watch for the blink of an eye. There's a second poet I'm going to read. He's a different case than everybody else. He spent much of his life in a lunatic asylum. In one of his brief moments of lucidity, he got out and he tried to steal Rob Schouten's girlfriend. This is one of his poems. It's called Angel. No dinero, no dollars, no baksheesh. Each day before dark, me and my hermanito hit the garbage heaps. Sometimes we find small grapefruits that we can eat, table scraps from chic downtown eateries. And for me to work the streets, a pair of laddered tights. Usually it's not much, but it's enough. My hermanito scuffs the dust as he dogs me with his plastic carrier. Then I whip him back early because Pap's got ulcers and Mama's born us a new sister in the barriada beneath the candle and the cross. Then it's vamonos, slip into a pair of the worn black fishnets and cruise the cantinas on the scarlet streets at night. Mama says that Jesus will grant a good girl dispensation to blow a gringo from the army camp and buy us fresh fish and all for the lamp for a week or more. I lie in the desierto beneath the Sierra Madre, where we played Hansel and Gretel among the desert McGees. Mama, why did the soldiers take me? I am only 13. This is a final poem by this guy. His name was Hans Fleck. You'll see that I slightly adapted it, but it's more or less his style. Headbangers. Bricked into the cornices and coins of some Syrian streets, one can still find a tablet carved with Hittite hieroglyphic reliefs. For centuries, nomadic Islamists would press their crania against these baked clay bricks, simple spirits murmuring lamentations in a sing-song Arabic, hoping that by cracking their skulls on a foreign script, they could cure their myopia or even blindness and enter utopia. So clearly the source of this ancient Syrian superstition resides with the brickies of the cities of Hattushush and Carcamesh and the chiseling Hittite scribes, probably paid by the line. And perhaps these mystical and mythical rhymes, if they do indeed rhyme, may have inspired the odd dogmatist or two into firing a prayer at Aleppo from Mecca or Jerusalem or Rome. Who can say for sure whether the shades of the ladies and gents from Anatolia to Nineveh may not have had their own bespoke picture of paradise, muzzled in the crosshairs of the mind's eye, as they are harvested like wheat in a mowing shower, a revelation of truth in a tongue of fire.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks so much for that reading. I think that Rob has managed to come back into the Zoom, so I'm just going to ask him to switch his camera on. Great.
Yeah, it's sort of a weird picture because I changed my position. Do you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you great.
Okay. My first poem, Op tournee. Op een avond strijk ik een overhemd en ga een lezing over een collega houden. Mijn God, wat een taal sla ik uit over mystiek en reizen om er niet te zijn. Hoe goed is het de dames te treffen. En onder het kreukloos katoen houdt mijn skelet mij overeind, waarin het met de organisatrice genuttigd maal langzaam verpoept in demisec-pis van 1993. Maar het helpt niet. De dichter is alleen in het landschap van de geest, zijn lekkere buurmeisjes ten spijt. En hij reist niet om er niet te zijn, hij reist om de reiskostenvergoeding. Vroeger. I think this is my oldest poem ever written. Vroeger. Lang geleden, maar wel na de oorlog, want die ken ik slechts van horen zeuren. Die tijd, die heette toen het heden nog, kon het na volgende octaaf gebeuren. De huizen klappertanden met hun deuren. In elke hoek zat een ontstellende moloch jongens van mijn leeftijd te verscheuren. En aan mijn bed waakte een krom gedrocht. Sliep ik bij toeval in, dan kwamen er harpijen om elk tot bloedens toe met mij te vrijen. En 's ochtends knaagde een enorme beverrad om alles wat ik op mijn lever had. Omdat ik met het geld voor de collecte mijn potje voor dichtbundels spekte. Door de weeks. Over mijn authenticiteit gesproken, belangstelling was er vandaag niet voor. En zelf lag ik half grieperig in bed. Slechts 1 keer werd ik naar de deur geroepen om aan autodafés mede te werken, getuigen van Jehovah's aan te steken. Nietig gestemd bleef ik in kamerjas urbi et orbi maar het raam uitstaren, zonder veel wijzer van mezelf te worden of van contemporaine wandelaars. Nee, met de toekomst was het niks vandaag. Avond werd het intussen wel natuurlijk. Pal boven mij werd smakeloos geneukt. Om 11 uur zei ik niemand wel te rusten, maar vals alarm. Tot 4 uur lag ik wakker in knoedels laken en maar transpireren. Ten slotte sliep ik mensenhatend in, mijzelf ontpoppend als een stralend god in een luchtig, niet te immens heelal, dat ik ineens ook weer verlaten moest. Niets dat ik in de haast daarachter liet. En 's ochtends over was mijn griep ook niet. En de laatste poem. Ontgoocheling. Vandaag sprak ik iemand in wereldbeelden. Een oude opkoper die weinig bood. Als je het kwijt wilt, kan het niet veel zijn, zei hij. En anders moet je het maar houden. Hij sprak me moed in. Houd het, beste vriend. Wat denk je ervoor in de plaats te krijgen? Het paradijs heb ik niet voor je bij me. En onder ons gezegd, het is er niet. Maar ik hield aan, hardnekkig en wat wanhopig. Wat biedt u, vroeg ik. Slaap, krankzinnigheid, vrouwen, mystiek inzicht, soms medicijnen, de zin, begaafdheid, misschien medelijden? Geef het voor niets, zei hij, de vrek. Leven is niet verplicht. Dicteer een zelfmoordbrief, die zal ik gratis voor je publiceren, totdat je iedereen hier interesseert. Er stonden mensen om ons heen te lachen. Ik was hun tijdverdrijf, zij niet het mijne. Loop door, riep ik, en ga me thuis bewenen. Of ruil met mij, dan lach ik jullie uit. Vergeet je jeugd, hernam de koopman kalm. Verspil je tijd niet aan afwezigheid of aan oorzakelijk verband van iets. Is er een muze? Ga met haar naar bed. Die wil niet, zei ik. Des te beter dan, een eeuwige. Maar sta niet bij haar stil. Begin morgen opnieuw en overmorgen. Maak je geen zorgen over melkwegstelsels. Verbitterd kwam ik thuis en dronk zeer veel bij droevige muziek, ononderbroken, tot ik stomdronken was en al maar dacht dat ik louter mijzelf geschapen had. Toen werd het zonder mij weer overdag en onderscheidde ik mij op mijn kussen zonder noodzaak, maar kennelijk ontwaakt door iets inwendigs waar ik mee moest leven. Ik ging de straat op en werd niet gelouterd. Nog voelde ik mij wereldnieuws ineens, of nietig in de volle winkelstraat, of democratisch, of tot iets verplicht. De handelaar was weg. Ik had een kater uit duizenden en was naar niets op zoek, maar vond het niet, omdat er weinig is, nauwelijks hoop en ook haast geen gemis.
Thank you so much, Rob. Thanks for all those wonderful readings. It was great to hear the poems in Dutch and English as well. So now we're going to go into a conversation with Paul and Robert. So I'm going to ask them to just join me on screen. And during this conversation, please do find the Q&A box, everyone, and get your questions in there that Robert can put to Paul later on during the event as we come towards the close. Do find that button for us and get your questions in. Thank you.
Jasmine and Robert, I wondered if you guys would maybe want to have the Dutch poets in on the chat as well.
Absolutely, I will turn everyone's camera on then.
Cool.
Yeah, yes, well, so far nobody's answered my question. Are the poets, is the editor collaborating in the death of a language? I'm sure it's an outrageous supposition, but I'm sure I'll be shot down in flames. But there are poets in Wales I know who refuse, as I said earlier on in the evening, to get translated. There are not many, but there are a few. And because English in Wales is universal, it's inescapable. Will it become inescapable in the Netherlands, Paul?
That's the Welshest thing I've ever heard, Robert. English is ubiquitous in Holland as it is in Wales, but nobody's scared of it in Holland. If I go into the baker's to buy a loaf of bread, and as soon as they hear my accent, they'll start talking to me in English, no problem. What you have in Wales, because we lost our War of Independence earlier than Ireland and Scotland, we fixated on preserving the language, preserve our culture, whereas the Irish just picked up a gun and they preserved it that way, and the Scottish went for political activity. So we have this thing, oh no, we mustn't lose the language. But I think if Welsh poets relaxed and embraced us as English speakers in Wales, because they tend to resent us as well, that they could be a bit more like the Dutch, self-confident. They don't have the least bit of worry about their language disappearing.
Good. That's wonderful to know. Wonderful to know.
Yeah.
I don't believe it, but
Yeah.
because you're Welsh. Yes, anyway.
But Rob and Michelle particularly have huge interaction with various international literature.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure. Is that by English though?
Excuse me. I'm not sure there's a comparison possible between the situation in Holland and in Wales or in England, because English is not that dominant in the, let's say, literary, it's not a literary language. And people speak a lot of English, but it's still very limited in a way. So, but there is one field in which English is becoming very dominant in a maybe worrying fashion, and that's science. Because all scientists, whether they're the social sciences or in physics, they have to write in English and they have to publish in English, because otherwise they're not taken seriously.
Right.
So, but on the bright side, Michelle, they pay me huge bucks to teach you to do that.
Oh, okay.
It's if you do a PhD in the Netherlands, for example, you have to write and publish 4 peer-reviewed articles in English. So you basically, all the students have to learn to write excellent academic English. And they were even talking about making English the main language of universities, which would be a threat to Dutch as the native language.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But maybe there's another thing I can tell, and that's there's nowadays, last 20 years or so, there's a huge increase in popular music being sung in Dutch. So for a while, most lyrics were in English of popular music, but there's now a lot of Dutch
Good.
songs being written. Also Dutch rap music. No idea if that's any good, but at least, you know, you ask me how the situation in Holland is. Well, maybe Rob has something to say about that. He used to be an academic, so he has muted. Oh, he has muted, I think so. And also, you mentioned that there were 15 or 17 million Dutch speakers, but there are more because also Flemish speakers, and in South Africa they also speak a bit of Dutch. So
yes, yeah.
maybe 25.
Well, but it's really hard to understand their Dutch. No, but it's bigger than the 17 million people. You know, it's well, it's about 25 million.
Yeah, my
Quite a
guess.
lot. Yeah.
So there's no danger of it vanishing as a language.
Well, maybe there is.
Yeah, it will vanish in the future, but I don't know how long that's going to take. It might take several centuries. And also, of course, there's a very merciful sea close by. So,
yes.
You know, maybe the only thing that will last of Dutch is blub, 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 blub.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Roll on tidal rising and the greenhouse effect.
Well, the dikes are not that high in Holland, so.
Okay. But I'd like to ask Paul why he chose these particular poets for Grand Larcenies.
Well, I've been reading Dutch poetry now for about 25 years. I've read these guys, you know, as they've written their collections, as they've won their prizes over the decades. When I came to choose the poets for this book, I thought, okay, I'm going to give everyone a fair shake. I'm going to read everything. Off I went to the library and the bookshops and went through everything. And you keep coming back to these poets because they're just so very good. And it was intriguing for me as well that poets as good as these still do not have collections in English. Because if I'm reading, for example, Rob and I have talked a lot about Berryman and, you know, see the connections with his work. And if I read Carmichel's work, I was like, wow, this is, you know, it's like reading, not in the same way, but you have the unexpected delight of a Miroslav Holub. You know, his work is so startlingly original. So you think, you know, it is a delight to engage with poems like this. I think Eva Gerlach has gone now. She'll know I've been working with her poems for about 20 years. So I read a lot of stuff. I came to these 10 poets, and a few other poets had already been translated by some of the excellent translators in the audience tonight. So there was no point in redoing any of those, except for Esther Jansma. As explained to Francis Jones, he published her selected poems with Blood Axe. But there's one poem of his called The Fall, and I just couldn't leave it alone. It's just such a gorgeous poem. Francis has done it brilliantly, and James Brockway also did it brilliantly, but it's one of those poems you just want to have. So I did that as well. But everybody else is basically new.
Right. Do you feel because you are a poet yourself, you feel the task or the need, impulsion to translate from the Dutch impinges on the time you've got for your own creative work? But that is creative work, of course. But your own poetry.
No, it's. I think you've only got so many poems in you, and I'm a slow writer. I mean, I write every day, but the poems evolve slowly. So I know that my own work is going to be a relatively small oeuvre by the time I croak. So this doesn't impinge at all. It's nice to do, and it broadens everything out because you can approach reality from totally different perspectives. I can't write like these guys, but it gives you the opportunity to step into their shoes. And like you did with The Adulterous Tongue, then you really try and write it in their perspective, in their voice.
Yes, yeah, indeed. Well, I was careful to choose an equal balance of men and women, and North Wellington, South Wellington, all that kind of stuff. But I think you've got to be even and to be seen to be even in your choice of translated people. Paul, is there anything you'd like to read yourself?
No, I don't think so. I've read enough. I'm more interested in all these guys, their work. In terms of splitting up between women and men, two of the women poets in the book do have collections in the UK, Hester Knibbe and Esther Jansma. So it was they have published their work, and with Esther, I'd only did 2 poems of hers for the collection, so it wasn't so relevant to invite her, I think, tonight.
Yeah,
it's very different translating female poets and male poets as well. It's I'm not going to get into the psychology of that. It's
why?
I noticed with the 3 women poets, very rightly, they were engaged with me with every word. It's like, you know, why are you saying this? Why are you doing that? And we came to ultimately we came to something. But with Rob, for example, I said, well, Rob, I might need to take a couple of liberties. He said, do what the hell you like, as long as I sound good. It's a different psychological perspective, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why that is, but ultimately you have to take a totally different approach to every poet you interact with. Their work is so very different. They're so very different as people. And ultimately, you're trying to get something down that everybody is satisfied with. And you know yourself, Robert, it takes a long time to be satisfied with something.
Well, you never are you? And then you die. So
Yeah.
That's what happens. Okay, yes. Will anybody else of the remaining poets on screen like to read something, either in Dutch or in English or in Flemish? Would any of them like to read anything?
I haven't prepared anything. I haven't thought about it. So
You haven't thought about it?
no, I haven't thought about it. No, just before this Zoom session, I was reading about this scandal in British politics that took place this afternoon. So
there's always a scandal. Come on, there's
I know,
always
but
a scandal in
the
Britain.
one today was pretty horrible. So
Horrible, yes.
So that was what it would seem.
Come on, you read a political poem, please. Come on.
In Dutch or in English?
English.
Tell me which one.
You decide.
I have no idea. So.
Robert, do you have a copy of the book there?
But
I do have it. Yes, I do have a
question from someone. Someone has put a question in the Q&A box, so maybe you can respond to that. Oh, the book has to be promoted. Okay.
Okay. Oh, yeah, go for it.
Rob, say something while I look through the book.
Yeah. I'm just wondering if I should read a poem from your anthology. But yeah, it's quite hard. And I have no sense of political issues. Anyhow. Did you find your poem, Michel?
There's always an opportunity to read the poem by Harriet Balkt.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
I'll read it in Dutch. It's in English. It's called "The Shredders on the Horizon," and it's page 143.
Right.
It's called "The Shredders on the Horizon."
Yeah.
He was Balkt was a wonderful poet and always protesting against everything. En het goes like this. Hakselmachines op de horizon. Schapen niet meer, enkel de geslepen wolf. Op de horizon herkauwen onmerkbaar hakselmachines wat hun invalt. Binnen blikkeren de aquarellen. Het zijn vissen met graat en al rauw afgedrukt op de steen. Zelfs de Rijn is misschien ook een vorm van pijn. Zoals voeten en stemmen lang vergeten wat hun dreef. Vierde monden, halve kelen. Sneller dan avondwolven is de vijand die op ons jaagt. Het is in een dode zeerol dat dit nog staat. Op een stijle van Miro brandt een ronde zon boven wat een landschap lijkt en met een rivier. Als gesternte straalt wat blijvend moet zijn in de wereld en ons. While I was reading it, I remembered the way he would read it himself, which is impossible to copy because he had a very, very deep and impressive voice. So I have a very shy voice, but he would do it more like a is op de horizon, schapen niet meer. Something like that. And then his hair would wave in front of his, forehead, and he would scare the living daylights out of everybody with his performance.
Okay.
Anyway.
Oh, I could read a poem. I just thought about reading a poem by Jan Eikelboom, because he was the translator of Larkin in Holland.
Okay, as long as it's not too long, because we're going to ask some questions afterwards.
Well, it's about 14 lines. Is that okay with you?
14's enough.
It's about a sonnet.
Okay.
And it's called Achteraf.
Okay.
Met moeite weet ik nog dat ik je vreselijk kon haten. Als ik je knoken hoorde kraken op je te punctuele tocht naar bed. En hoe ik vocht om zelf maar niet in slaap te raken. Want wat ik van mezelf niet mocht, was alles wat jij niet kon laten. De stipte plicht, het strikt geloof. Hoewel ik toch mijn hoofd meeboog voordat wij onze speklap aten. Want grieven wilde ik je niet. Maar ik kon niet meer met je praten. Ik, vreemdeling die van je hield. I think this is a poem about his father and about his loss of faith in religion and in God.
Okay.
I feel akin to it.
Okay. Tremendous. We do, Michael Schmidt is asking me to, I think, to ask 2 questions, which are on the Q&A.
Okay.
From Samantha Wyn Rydach, who is Welsh poet from Ceredigion in West Wales. And her question is, Paul, this is for you, Paul. Do you want to say something about the difference between translations, versions, imitations, and which do you prefer doing?
Oh, golly, it's everybody wants a decent translator, but we've all grown up as well reading poets' versions of different poems. So the first translations I read were by people like Pound, Eliot, Lowell, Christopher Logue, without even realizing that they were translations and how they interacted with the original authors. And then later, when you actually start translating as well and you get paid to do it, you realize there are different approaches to things. So if, for example, I was translating Eva Gerlach, they're very accurate. Sometimes to deliver a poem, you need to take a little bit of distance from it. Eva Gerlach has actually left now, but we were having coffee last year, and she read one of my translations of Gerrit Kavanaugh, and she said, "Oh wow, for me it felt exactly like reading Kavanaugh himself." And then she compared the English to the Dutch, and she said he would never have approved of this. So I think sometimes that's what you do. You take a step sideways to try and get the essence of the poet. And then there are other things like what I do with Hans Fleck. I suppose that's similar to what Eliot did with Gautier, the French poet. If you know Eliot's Hippopotamus, it started as Gautier's Hippopotamus, which is sort of an amusing poem about how the poet compares himself to the thick-skinned hippo. And then Eliot has this whole second section about comparing it to the Catholic Church, and suddenly it becomes something else. And it grows out of Gautier's poem, but it's then the product of two brains. So I think that's also an entirely legitimate approach, but you have to talk to the poets, see what they think. When I was working on Rob's stuff, for example, I mean, I translated a few of Rob's things over the years, and they didn't work for me. But then he was talking to him about Berryman and realizing how I could maybe approach Rob's work, because between the lines of what he's writing, there's this mocking irony the whole time, which is almost impossible to grab hold of. But then suddenly, through Berryman and his approach, I thought, oh, this is how you could do Rob. And then, you know, you take a little step away, and suddenly you've got his voice. So yeah, there's lots of different, Samantha, there's lots of different ways to approach it, but it depends what you're trying to do and why. So sometimes poetry is play, and sometimes it's serious business. I mean, there's a lot of excellent translators in the audience today, all producing entire collections, and they are crucial. You know, it's if you want the representation of any of these poets in English, you also want that kind of translation. But different kinds of translation can live alongside each other. You know, there's lots of approaches to the same poet, to the same poem. We've just talked about the death of Ewan Clwyd and how the Dutch poet Menno Wichmann died a couple of years ago. There are two versions of his now. David Colmer's published him with Ark, and Judith Wilkerson is publishing with Shearsman. Two very different takes on the same poet. But what the hell, why the hell not? It's great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Paul, final answer. A second question from Jane Griffiths. Jane asks, I was wondering whether working in two languages means that the idioms of one influence those of the other. That's for Paul.
Of course, but the way that other cultures express themselves, sometimes they have thoughts and ways of expressing themselves that we do not have and can't even approximate. So I suppose if you are looking for, if they were looking for an effect in Dutch, I have to look for an effect that provokes a reaction in English. But as you were just discussing with the idea of you know, latching onto language, that they don't have that. Some things are experienced entirely differently.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we hope that answers your question, Jane. Maybe Rob and Kay might have answers themselves as the remaining poets on screen. Rob?
Was that the question?
I would wonder whether working in two languages means that the idioms of one influence those of the other. Are you influenced by idioms in another language, or do you think it's irrelevant?
No, I was influenced by other Indians. I know a bit of Spanish, and I translated some poems from Spanish,
Right.
and that definitely influenced me.
Right.
Although it's hard to say how it influenced me, but I definitely felt that. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And Michel has actually translated Octavio Paz, so he will have had some, he knows firsthand how that is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to have to jump in and bring this conversation to a close, but we are at time. So it has been an hour, it's flown by, but thank you all so very much. Thank you all for sticking with us through our technical hitches and other things. It's been a real pleasure to hear the poems read in Dutch and in English as well. So thanks so much for your readings, and thanks for shedding a little more light on the book and your conversation there. Everyone who is here, thank you for attending. You will get £2 discount off the book if you buy it directly from our website. I'm putting the link and the code to buy the book directly from our website in the chat for you now. If you can't find it or you can't do that right now, just check your inbox tomorrow. You'll get an email and it'll have the link and the code in for you, so you can get a discounted copy of the book. So thanks again for being here. Please join us again next time. Our next launch is in a couple of weeks on November the 24th. We're launching John F. Dean's new collection, Naming of the Bones, and he will be joined by James Harper. So check the website, please buy a copy of the book, and please join us again at our next launch. I'm going to leave the chat open for just a couple of minutes so you can get your final messages in and access that link to buy your book. Definitely buy the book. But I'm going to close all our cameras off now. So it's good night from us, and it's thank you very much.